Welcome. I'm James Callicutt, Waterfowl and Upland Gamebird Extension Specialist.
I'm Mark McConnell, Assistant Professor of Upland Birds at Mississippi State University.
Dr. Brian Davis, Professor, Waterfowl and Wetlands Conservation.
The three of us are all biologists and hunters. Join us for discussions about game bird conservation and management and the science behind it. Of course, we'll also have conversations about bird dogs and bird hunting as well. This is Gamebird University. All right, so we've got a great conversation to have today, and the upland side of our audience is going to be excited. I've been hearing a lot of talk that I'm overdoing the ducks here lately. I'm not going to point any fingers at some of my friends and colleagues on that one, but no, in all seriousness, we've got a great guest today. We're going to talk about some birds that Mark and I are quite fond of, one of which, we can pursue here in Mississippi, but another one, a little more northern bird, but well worth the migration to the North Woods to check out. But we have Dr. Ben Jones, President and CEO of the Ruffed Grouse and American Woodcock Society, and alumnus of Mississippi State University. See, as folks can tell from all of our guests, we have that's a continuing theme that a lot of people who are game bird experts out there are from Mississippi State University, have some connection to it, and Ben's no different.
That's not really our fault. We're not trying to get alumni. It just happens to be that the people that are wildly successful in this field happen to be alumni.
That's right. And you can tell Mark's not biased because he's still like an LSU Tiger at heart. Like, you can look behind him. Yeah, right there.
I'm covering it up.
I think I'd rather look at the door than you, but...
All right, keep going.
Yeah. Anyway, Ben, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with us today. So welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. I will put a plug in for Mississippi State, and it's, you have your alma mater, or they are always strong. I did my master's at Mississippi State, so I was also at Penn State, and we could talk about the University of Tennessee a little bit too. But it might have been partly tongue-in-cheek, Mark, but it is true that a lot of the people in my cohort before then and since that came through Mississippi State are really involved in the conservation field in many different roles. And when you look at your land-grant universities and your wildlife and your forestry programs, Mississippi State has really stayed true. I'm super proud to have been part of this and super happy to see that it still happens on this applied of the forestry and wildlife academics, and Mississippi State continues to turn out people who can come out and do it applied in the field. So I'm really proud to have been part of that, and I love to see the people that continue to come out of state.
We tried. We're this new cohort. When y'all were here, you had West, Damaris, Leopold, Kaminsky, all the big names, at the time, and a lot of those guys have retired, and we're trying to, keep that momentum going. So yeah, it has been fun to be a part of this program and kind of carry on that tradition. And Callicutt and I and a lot of the faculty here try real hard to produce kids and students who can get out and hit the job ready when they graduate.
Right. Keep it up. And that list is so long. I do have worked with people like Dr. Leopold and Dr. Jeannie Jones, just an incredible mentor.
Oh yeah, forgot Jeannie. Yeah.
When I was there. So good stuff. Keep it up, Mark. We're counting on you, man. Keep it up.
We're trying. No pressure.
So, Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about the Ruffed Grouse Society and American Woodcock Society? Give us kind of a little overview of y'all's mission and the things that are important to y'all.
Yeah, well, good. It's a good segue with the applied piece. So the Ruffed Grouse Society was formed in 1961, and it's important right out of the gate. So when I first came in here, I saw some quotes from the first president of the Ruffed Grouse Society and some things from the founders. Ruffed grouse always were just kind of the flagship species, the ambassador of the work. But those individuals from the get-go, many of them enjoyed hunting ruffed grouse in Monterey, Virginia, so in the Shenandoah Mountains. But for them, it was really about learning more about forest wildlife, with ruffed grouse kind of as that flagship. And if y'all think about 1961, we were just starting to come into the heyday of wildlife research, or yet to even peek into it. So there was a lot yet to learn about wildlife and habitat and wildlife forest interactions. There was a lot still to be learned from the forest ecology management and silviculture front in 1961. So it's pretty cool to be part of an organization that at that time when it was started really sought to learn about more about wildlife and forestry, and then to the applied piece, how to advocate for that good forest management for wildlife being put on the ground. So, and as many of your listeners and YouTube certainly know, often synonymous with grouse is the American woodcock in the uplands. For me, it's always, we're going grouse and woodcock hunting in most cases. And so in 2014, we got intentional about that piece. This was prior to me coming on board, but I formed the American Woodcock Society to think about forest wildlife conservation in places where there aren't and weren't ever any ruffed grouse. Places like Mississippi and the coastal plain and Piedmont of the Carolinas, places where these migratory birds spend a really important part of their life cycle during the winter and during the migration. So the formation of the American Woodcock Society, together as a joint effort with the Ruffed Grouse Society, really gave us that bigger picture, and it expanded some landscapes where we can really focus. Interesting thing, I hope we could talk more about this in our discussion today. In 1861, we were learning a lot about wildlife through research. And over the next several decades, a lot of information came available. Gordon Gullion was doing some groundbreaking work with ruffed grouse, all the stuff that was going on with deer. I mean, you name it. To this day, it's pretty cool with woodcock that we're learning very basic things that we never knew about woodcock because of technology we have available today, especially GPS transmitters and what's going on with the eastern woodcock migration studies. So for me, it's pretty cool having coming on to wildlife and forest biology when I did. There was a lot that was already kind of known. With woodcock, we're still just getting there right now, and that's pretty exciting.
Well, it's funny you bring up the technology. I can't think of any wildlife species, or at least game species, that we haven't learned something new probably in the last 20 years or even 10 years due to the advanced technology. So you think about some of, like, even in the quail world, I mean, that's one of the most studied birds in the world. And we're still learning stuff that we didn't know because of genetic analysis, DNA, and, all the different solar panels that on transmitters, and even like with ducks, it seems like we're still in this technological revolution where we thought, hey, we've been studying these critters forever. And like we were talking the other day, James, about the woodcock study from Craig, I can never say his last name, but showing that they're breeding on their way back in migration. Like, that was crazy.
Yeah.
I was going nuts. I took that paper into a faculty meeting and I wasn't paying attention at all, which is pretty common in a faculty meeting. But because I couldn't stop reading this paper showing that we now see that woodcock are attempting breeding as they migrate, and that just blew my mind. And that's something that some people have probably anecdotally observed over time, but really quantifiable, really strong. They confirmed the nests. Like, it just, that blew my mind, and it keeps me excited because there's still stuff we can learn, like you're saying.
Yeah, and that was Colby Slezik's PhD or dissertation. It was on all that, and he published a couple of few papers off his dissertation are pretty interesting too.
All technology driven.
Yeah. And like you had the same thing, like you mentioned quail, but even with mallards, the most studied thing, and as far as from a duck standpoint, we're learning new stuff with GPS transmitters and all the technology that we've garnered over this short period of time is really changing the game for us. But so the door's wide open for woodcock for sure, I think, in that regard.
It is, and a lot of it is, like you mentioned, Mark and James, kind of fine tuning. Yeah, we knew this part, but now technology can take us deeper into that. With woodcock, it was kind of assumed where they were migrating to and spending their winters. So we're learning right now some real basic, essential information about woodcock, like what are the essential stopover geographies. What does that habitat even look like in the coastal plain in Piedmont? And every time I see something, somebody sends pictures, just moved a bunch of woodcock in this area, and it's a recently burned pine stand. I'm like, what? Why is that? That doesn't match with anything we knew from all the years at Moosehorn and everywhere else about super high hardwood stem density. They're recently burned pine stands. We've got a lot to learn. And just to say one note, there's also this like really wild, cool factor. When you think about these waves of migrating woodcock making their way from the wintering grounds back north, Some of them have already bred and nested while they're still in the wintering grounds. Some of them are breeding on their way up. It's just like this huge genetic mixing. It's beautiful design, whether random or whatever. But these birds are just sharing
Yeah,
genetic material and like breeding and nesting and moving up through. It's just wild to think about.
yeah. You mentioned that about moving woodcock in a burned pine stand. That's what Mark and I can't ever wrap our. We woodcock hunt together quite a bit, and like this past year, we went. We got some intel that there was some birds in this, kind of reforested area, like core mitigation type public land, and we went out and we started hunting every bit of the cover that looked like what we thought of as woodcock cover. And then we're just sitting there trying to figure out, okay, well, where do we go next? And Mark's dog goes on point, and we're like, there can't be anything there. And sure enough, woodcock flushes, and it's just sitting in the wide open, not a bit of ground level cover in this closed canopy, bottomland, reforested site. And it's like, what's going on?
The only vertical structure at a woodcock's level was limbs that had self-thinned and fallen over. You could have putted across the water oak or willow oak trees, whatever it was. It was that clean. And then the next hour and a half was absolute chaos. Just point, wild flush. And we're like, why are they here?
They're just standing in the wide open, I mean, they're obviously, because their plumage pretty concealed and standing there, but yeah, in no actual vertical structure or cover besides, like Mark said, just like limbs laying on the ground,
But that's why when we were talking, Ben, the first time we chatted about this, going back to the kind of the research on it, the technology and telling you where the bird's at in real time, but then actually going to that site and investigating the actual structure or components of that forest. Because if you look at just the remote sensing layers, bottomland hardwood or regenerating forest, but there's a lot of slack in there, to borrow a Fred Guthrie term. There's a lot of slack in what that structure actually looks like and why woodcock are there. And then the whole thing about if they just showed up, they may not even been in that area long enough to even make a really informed decision. They may have made we'll just say a rush decision as they were running out of reserves and dropped into the first cover they could see. And that's probably where Callicutt found them. I'd love to know, without being hunted like crazy, if those birds would have, how long they would have stayed in that. So yeah, there's just so much we don't know. I mean, that's what I think keeps most of us going in this profession, is what we don't know. And then of course just what management we need to do to address that. So Callicutt, we were going to talk. The plan was to do Ruffed Grouse first, but we kind of got into woodcock first. So we'll just flip it. So Ben, here's my things we want to talk to you about.
Okay.
A couple of things. Again, down here in the wintering grounds, tough thing to study because, they're not here as maybe predictably as they are, or for as long as they are obviously on the breeding ground. So a lot of the research, like you and I were talking about on habitat management for Ruffed Grouse and woodcock, but we'll just go with woodcock for now. A lot of it's historically, most of the research is on the breeding grounds. And then down here, we know how to manage forests. And there's been some work down here, but what are the conditions or do we even know? What do we need to be doing if somebody listening goes, man, I saw some woodcock on my property, and then what do I need to do to get more? Let's assume, just for the sake of simplicity, they own a huge chunk of acreage, right? So that we're not scale limited. What is the forest type we need to be promoting for American woodcock on the wintering grounds to help them out?
I think there's a lot of it. I hate to even give a percent, but let's go ahead and say 3/4 of it, you can still look to that same structure of what's been found in a lot of the summer and spring grounds, some of the northern studies. So that high stem density most of the time is going to be really important, especially for that daytime habitat. And so even though we're seeing weird things like, why are these woodcock in this recently burned pine stand? We're also finding them in places like bottomland cane thickets, where you've got that high stem structure. And the first time that I hunted one of these places, it was in the coastal plain of South Carolina, and dog goes on point and it's in a cane thicket. And it's like, okay, I get it. This is kind of structurally the same as a 5-year-old regenerating aspen stand. I kind of get it. And so where it gets interesting with, you just mentioned, Mark, we know how to manage the forest, and it's pretty common in southern pine forest management to do some pre-commercial thinning or these early burns. Another place that we've found a lot of birds just in hunting, and from the research finding out there in there is kind of what has been termed the southern rough, some regenerating pine stands that hadn't yet been burned, where there's still a lot of rubus and that briar structure prior to a pre-commercial thinning or a burning, and that high stem density structure is there. So this is really of interest to me of what can we learn from woodcock habitat needs that might maybe cause us to look a bit differently in the way we've managed some of these forests in the past. But any way you look at it, whether it's fire, timber harvest, or whatever, there's this early successional disturbance driven systems, whether it's bottomland hardwood floodplains, which are frequently disturbed, burned uplands, regenerating hardwoods. Disturbance is really going to continue to be key for woodcock habitat.
Man, that's a really good point. It brings up two things that I was thinking that I want to highlight. So, quail gets the reputation for the firebird, right? The fire is the most common disturbance we try to promote, but pretty much any disturbance we'll take, you can't have it. Like you said, there was a great paper published about 10 years ago, shows that early successional forest communities are doing this, right? In the eastern United States, at least. And subsequently, almost every bird dependent on that vegetation type is also in decline. So go figure, right? The disturbance is key. And you mentioned cane thickets. When I was at UGA, I used to woodcock hunt on one of the WMAs south of Athens. And, it was all privet, just god-awful Chinese privet. But the structure was there. And when we hunt like Wisconsin and these states, when you find birds, especially woodcock, it's like, man, I'll take a picture. And the species are different, but the majority of the woodcock I find, with the exception of that crazy day Callicutt and I had, they're in this, like you said, it's the same, the species are different, but structurally it's very similar. But there was a spot there where there had been a big tree fall gap, the wind had blown it down right off the Coney River, and all this cane had come up and had muscadine. It was just a mess. It was guaranteed to hold birds when they were here. Mm-hmm. And I can remember one day I was having a rough day. I had missed 11 birds in a row. James is knowing that's not uncommon. And I was infuriated. I was cussing. I was screaming. And I was hunting with a poodle at the time. She was a flushing dog. So of course you had to be, stand ready, and you couldn't see her through most of that privet. So you're just listening for her. And then I was so frustrated. I said, fine, let's just walk straight to that spot. I send her into it. Of course, 2 woodcock come out. I miss one and then hit the other. And it went down in the Coney River, and Nancy Ansfield actually wrote an article in Covey Rise about that particular retrieve, because my dog had to go from upland to a water retrieve real quick. But that's the thing, right? It was that cane thicket. It was that disturbance. Mm-hmm. Something had happened there that made those birds always go to that spot. And that part is something that we've got to get a better handle of, is just disturbing these forests at a frequency and at a scale that can make these birds, when they're here, at least put them in predictable places so we don't have to spend so much time figuring out the unpredictable. I think a lot of times they're making a choice, probably based on a lack of ideal opportunities.
Yeah, and that makes me think too, Mark, about, that one of our favorite duck holes on the farm there, the cypress break there. So right there in the edge of that pretty older growth timber is a couple of cane thickets, and I have pushed woodcock out of those. We haven't put a bird dog down in there yet, which I don't know why we haven't, but moving right there at the edge of that ag field, probably some nocturnal, good place to be for their foraging and whatnot. Yeah, they were sticking in those cane thickets, and I'm sure probably some pretty thick palmetto areas probably hold some woodcock too. So some of that may not be optimal, but it's a place to get.
Yeah. But you think about the reduction in cane, like across the bottomlands of the southeast. Yeah, I mean, there's very few just kind of intact cane thickets. Now, I've also pushed my dog through several where I didn't put up a woodcock, but that's probably more of an issue of just the poor timing. But yeah, so the disturbance being the most prominent sticking feature there in these forests, we need more timber disturbance.
One of the things that we're focusing on, and Sarah Serb is our forest conservation director on the coastal plain in Piedmont, working mostly in the Carolinas. And just a word quickly about our conservation delivery structure, we have regional forest conservation directors that are the architects of our regional programs. And Sarah Serb is our first forest conservation director in a wholly, fully woodcock dominated landscape in the coastal plain in Piedmont. And one of the early opportunities that Sarah's finding, and she's our point of contact right now for the Eastern Woodcock Migration Research Study too, one of the early opportunities because we try to find gaps of where we can work and make a difference as an NGO, try to be nimble. One of those early opportunities is in the bottomland floodplain management and these cane areas. Nobody's really working on managing a lot of those sites, and it seems like they're going to be really important for Woodcock. So we're going to step into that, see what else we can learn, and what can we do proactively to help manage them. Another point here, and this might, at least for a later point, segue us into ruffed grouse. We really focus on, Mark, you're right, the early cereal, young forest, early successional, whatever you want to call it, that habitat in the east is going down and species are with it. So we've got to focus on that part. But there's also really important to have that diversity. And with woodcock, they spend part of their time and most of their evenings in very wide open spaces. You can trap woodcock and band them in the evenings using spotlights and pretty open hayfields. So that diversity is also really important, whether we're talking about grouse or woodcock. But we don't have to go out and manage and promote across most of this landscape for open nocturnal roosting habitat. There's plenty of that out there. So again, what we focus on is
no
the
shortage of
part
hayfields.
that we need more of. And the same is true with ruffed grouse. If you look at what Gordon Gullion laid out in the early days of his research, it was a checkerboard. Now, why would you have a checkerboard? If all they needed was young forest habitat, try to keep it all in young forest. But Gordon Gullion realized that it was the diversity, the fact that you had older forest next to interspersed with young forest that was primo for ruffed grouse, to the point where your ideal situation was a managed checkerboard where you're managing aspen on a 10 to 15 year rotation, and it's lights blinking on and off, where you've got that forest diversity is always there. But again, when we look at most forest landscapes right now, it's homogeneous 125-year-old forest across most of the eastern hardwoods. So the place where we need to focus on is creating more young forest habitat. And
Man,
also, a difference with grouse and woodcock, the difference between true early successional and young forest. I always talked about woodcock when I was working for our state wildlife agency as habitat division chief. They were our instant gratification species. If you took an area that was grown in, disturbed it, did some burning in there, got the right structure, woodcock would occupy that sometimes the next migratory season or within a year or two. Boom, they were right there. You're feeling good about yourself. With ruffed grouse, when you manage a stand, it's going to be at least 3, 4, 5, 8 years before ruffed grouse get in there when that structure gets right for them. So woodcock is the instant gratification species. Grouse, you got to be a little more patient. Diversity is the name of the game.
Well, you brought up a really cool point when you talk about the checkerboard, and Aldo Leopold doesn't, I mean, he gets talked on plenty of podcasts, but the man does not get enough credit. In my opinion, he essentially created the field of landscape ecology and never got credit for it, because he was talking about adjacency of patches and interspersion before the landscape ecologists had even formed their own conference. And if you go back to his first book in game management, and it shows the interspersion stuff, and he talks about how important it is to have those vegetation types intermixed. Like the same thing, right? You can't just get away with a one size fits all. Very few critters, at least very few game critters, at least game birds, respond well to homogeneity, right? They need that interspersion. And that's another thing down here, where even on areas where we can get in the bottomlands, where we can get cuts done, it is often an afterthought. Well, did we consider what we're complementing in that landscape? And landscape's a scary term because we're not specifying how big it is. But I agree 100%. In addition to just managing and creating more early successional forests, the zoom out view, the 30,000 foot view of what that region looks like. And then another thing you mentioned, I wrote down, there's plenty of hay fields and ag fields. And what I'd love to know is, I know there was some research a while back. I don't know if anybody's done it since, about like the benefits of no-till fields, maybe on earthworm abundance and that kind of thing for foraging woodcock, but ways we can, because the average hayfield with Bermuda grass down here, Bermuda, Bahia, fescue, there's not a whole lot we're going to change. That stuff's not going anywhere anytime soon. But in the ag fields, the crop fields, we do have some wiggle room to manipulate and adjust those to increase soil health, which should increase earthworm abundance and those kinds of things. And I'd love to figure out a way to dial in on that a little more, because there is this surge in no-till right now. Even in the South, we're getting more and more farmers more interested in air quoting regenerative ag, just because that's just kind of a buzzword in my opinion. But that does seem to be increasing, and I wonder if we're having any tangible benefit to nocturnal use at any important scale down here using that.
Mentioned the non-native perennial cool season grass dominated fields, and this is one of those examples of instant gratification. If you have these fields, and there a lot of times they're recreationally mowed hay fields. If you come in the next couple weeks, actually September even into early October, and remove those non-native cool season grasses. You mentioned it's fescue bahia for you. For us, it's a little bit further north, orchard grass, fescue, timothy, same deal. If you come in and remove that with a late summer, early fall spray and get that carpet removed, that I worked at the University of Tennessee for Dr. Craig Harper. He loves to talk about, still loves to talk about, remove that carpet and then stand back and let that seed bank come in. That was one of those instant gratification pieces where if we took these old hay fields, got rid of the non-native cool season grass and just stood back, and you start getting some forb, some goldenrod, even some mare's tail just after it started to come back in, and you're making that structure, boom, those woodcock were right in there.
Man, we should have a whole nother conversation to just talk shit about Craig. I forgot you had worked for him.
Man,
he's never going to listen to this, so we can joke with him. Yeah, I love Craig Harper. He's one of my most favorite people. Callicutt, just this morning drinking coffee, we're talking about, we all every now and then inappropriately use the term habitat in the wrong context. And if you want to be shamed publicly for that, get Craig Harper within earshot. I was doing a woodlands webinar with him, Bronson Strickland, like 2019, and I accidentally said habitat wrong, and in front of like hundreds of virtual respondents, Craig, when it just totally called me out on it. It was brutal, but he was right. So yeah, we'll maybe have a separate podcast to tell Craig stories.
That's good. That kind of thing keeps you honest in another place.
Yeah.
And the differentiation is important. Craig will point out the difference between early successional habitat and young forests. Those really are kind of different stages. And when you look at woodcock, they're truly an early successional habitat user. Like, that's why they're instant gratification, right? You disturb these places, they hit them very quick, very early in that successional reset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Man, it's too hot down in Mississippi right now to have all this woodcock conversation. It's making me itch to go get on the ground, but it's 98 degrees here. Callicutt, you want to switch to Ruffed Grouse?
Yeah.
Well, Ben, you already kind of touched on it, the delay, right? So here's my question. So I've hunted up in the Northwoods a few years in a row now. Love it. Really easy to get lost. But other than that, it's one of my favorite parts of the country to go put my bird dog on the ground. But the silvicultural treatments there compared to down here, that's what I want to kind of break into.
Yeah.
It seems like up there, on the right soils and the right spots, y'all can do a clear cut, and then when conditions are right, you're going to get aspen. And then you're, like you said, you're waiting for the successional clock to tick before ruffed grouse are going to start utilizing it. Is that fair to say?
The first thing I would like to clarify is where's up there, because there's a lot of difference, like moving from the northern Great Lakes around to the mid-Atlantic and central Appalachians up to the northern Appalachians. So there's a lot of difference in the forest types and the silvicultural approach there. But you did mention aspen. So where specifically might you be thinking about? Just the state.
Minnesota, Wisconsin, that Michigan, that kind of world.
Yeah. Okay. So
we can do the South in just a minute.
We're in the core of aspen distribution in those states, and aspen is a really important pioneer species. We can't forget that too, that aspen's a pioneer. This is such a short-lived tree. It's so unique. By the time an aspen tree is 60 years old, it's pretty old. And it's its commercial or reproductive maturity somewhere probably around 40 to 50 years. If you've got aspen that's 60, you're going to see it starting to fall out and be replaced by other northern hardwoods, beech, cherry, maple. So aspen's kind of a flash in the pan tree because it's a pioneer tree and it's very short-lived. But you're right, the best prescription for regenerating aspen is to clear cut it. The more sunlight you have hitting the ground and warming up the roots that remain from those parent trees you cut, the better, because it's going to regenerate from dormant buds from those roots. So it's all about root sprouting. That's how you get 30,000 stems to the acre in a regenerating aspen stand, because each of those roots is just popping up all those stems. The really important part, though, is making sure that you're rotationally managing that aspen, and it becomes a 10-15 year rotation because its maturity age is age 60. So we can manage it on a much shorter rotation. The other cool thing, you started to get into some really neat landscapes in the upper Great Lakes, is where you're not just wholly focused on the aspen management, but managing aspen in the context of other things like spruce forest, the red pine forest there, and you're starting to do some thinning and burning in red pine, and there's aspen adjacent, and then you've got wetlands that have things like alder on their margins. Then you're really in that sweet spot. I'll pick on a place where I worked on grouse. Somebody from Western North Carolina goes to the upper Great Lakes and they see these aspen clear cuts and all this young forest habitat. They're like, oh my gosh, I have surely gone to heaven. This is where it's at. You'll see these hunters a lot of times. And here's my hunting tip, I guess. See these aspen regenerating clear cuts and be like, this is it. And just go dive headlong into these aspen clear cuts and maybe not get the bird numbers that they would get if they concentrated on the margins or hunting on the edge of some of the older forests where that interspersion is highest.
Yeah, we made that mistake.
Yeah. I was just going to...
I felt targeted right now.
Yeah. I was going to say, was Ben monitoring our last trip to the Northwood?
I was not hot.
Because that's certainly what we did.
I swear I did not know where he was. But it's a natural tendency. I know the first times that I went through Michigan and Minnesota, coming from where I grew up hunting in Pennsylvania, and then where I worked on ruffed grouse research in Western North Carolina, it was like, look at all of this young forest habitat and regenerating aspen. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, you mentioned the alders. My blood pressure shot up as soon as you said that, because I've tried that whole walking the edge thing, and every time a grouse or a woodcock gets up, they never fall into the woods. They always seem to fall into the alders, and I have a compromised back, and I don't care if there's 10 woodcock per minute. I'm not walking through one of those damn things again. It is brutal, because when you gotta get in there, sometimes it's so infuriating with all the sticks going every way. I end up just cursing and getting mad, and I walk out anyway. But yes, I have moved many birds on those edges, but I'm almost to the point where it's not worth it. It's so infuriating to have to traverse that stuff.
So as you're thinking of interspersion, it's also really important seasonally too, and what's going on during the summer months, and when you're providing the right structure and the right places for grouse, or in our case, when you're hunting for them. And I've found many, many times that, especially if it's been a drier summer, early fall, early October, you're going to have a lot of ruffed grouse that are still hanging kind of on those edges where there's still some forbs, there's some soil moisture there. And a lot of times early on, you can get this real mix of grouse and woodcock hanging out together on the margins of those alder thickets.
So you mentioned the difference between there and the South. So when I was in Georgia, I was at UGA for a little while, and I was working with the Forest Service trying to get some grouse cuts done on some of the north, because there are some grouse in northern Georgia. In fact, we published a paper a couple years ago. James Martin led it, and his postdoc Will Lewis, but kind of monitoring ruffed grouse populations across as much as we could. Not a whole lot of grouse there, which is not surprising when you look at their timber, the status of their timber. And what was interesting was we were trying to get to just do some basic silvicultural treatments, and the Forest Service was dedicated. They wanted to do it. They knew they needed to do it, but they got a lot of opposition from groups that really didn't want anybody cutting oak trees on the national forest. And we actually went, I've told James a story, we actually went and met with that group and spent a whole day doing a site visit with them. Linda Ordinway, who was, I don't know if Linda's still with y'all, but she was She was with the Ruffed Grouse Society at the time. She came down. I met her, and she and I spent the entire day going around these different sites and trying to make the case of we need sunlight on the ground, not only for woodcock or Blackburnian warblers or every other non-game species we could think of that we thought would help in the argument. But finally, she goes, we need it for forest health, right? If we don't disturb these forests, we're compromising at some frequency, we're compromising forest health. And we never had any progress. And at the end, the last stop at the visit was a spot that I think the Forest Service had clear cut maybe in the 80s. And that group's forest health, or their forest ecologist, he said, why don't y'all just clear cut this again? All right, you've already ruined this forest, just clear cut this again. Like, why would you go and cut other stuff? And it was the most challenging conversation of my life, trying to explain why we needed sunlight on the floor. And then he uttered this statement that I tell students all the time, quote, because I've memorized it, I don't understand how cutting a tree benefits wildlife. And, so I took my hat off and I told him to turn around and I threw it into the woods. And I said, pretend that's a ruffed grouse and you're a predator. Now turn around, let's count how many seconds until you see that hat. Of course, he turns around, it's closed canopy, just you could see for 200, 400, 300 yards. He goes, there it is. I was like, okay. And then we went to a spot where just some natural tree fall storm stuff had happened, did the same thing. And it took him like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, to go find the hat. And I said, that's why. Sunlight comes down, generates the understory, whatever. And it actually took that level of explanation to get the guy to go, I get it, but I don't want you cutting any of the oak trees. And it was like an 8-hour day that we made no progress. It was like an 1,100 acre prescribed cut. By the time they got through with it, I think 200 acres got cut 4 years later. And it was just incredibly frustrating. So kind of walk us through some of the other challenges we might have in the South, at least in the Carolinas and the northern extent of Georgia, which is the southern extent of ruffed grouse range. What are some of the other challenges we've got? Because the silviculture's maybe, I wouldn't say more complicated, just maybe more nuanced down there from a ruffed grouse standpoint. Or maybe it's not.
Public opinion and pressure is a huge part of what we have to work through, and we try to be part of solutions for. And we spend, I'm going to go ahead and call it an inordinate amount of time on stakeholder groups, especially in Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, North Georgia. Public lands are such an important part of that landscape, vast landscape scale importance of publicly held land. So we spend an awful lot of time on stakeholder groups, working on forest plan revisions. And honestly, Mark, the discussion you had is very similar to discussions we always have. And, at that conversation, you agreed on forest health, or, well, y'all say you're all about biodiversity, so are we. It's a bridge too far when you have to cut a tree. So it's just a matter of working through the process, having stakeholder groups, and having people. A big part of this is to rebalance the discussion. And the way it got to be for several decades is you'd have these public meetings and there'd be a few Ruffed Grouse Society folks show up pro-management, and they'd be outnumbered 10-1 on the anti-management side. It's very tough for the Forest Service then, with the public input process and hearing from shareholders that are 10-1 no management, to feel like they can confidently go out and manage those landscapes. So we've got to tip that balance. And one way I've talked about it, and I honestly believe this is true, that the word conservation, let's think about that word conservation, coined by Gifford Pinchot in the early 1900s, when there was no conservation. There wasn't even a word. There was no wildlife science, no forest science. And it came at its heart was in the concept conservation was protection through use. And we are not going to save these lands that at that time were being completely overexploited. We weren't going to go against market forces and the timber barons. We had to talk about how, as a resource, that its use was important for the growth of our country and for the health of our country and our communities. And conservation, that is it. That is the definition of conservation: protection through the sustainable use. Today, do a Google search in a little bit and put in the words conservation, timber sale. I haven't done this yet, but you'll get the point. And you'll see some headlines: conservation groups sue the Forest Service over logging projects. And I look and I say, who are these conservation groups? It's preservationist groups. That's not
Preservation. Yeah.
conservation at all. But you know what? This is on
That's
us.
right.
We have let our word, this Gifford Pinchot show, this is out of Leopold, our word has been hijacked. And we need to claim it back. We got to
Yeah,
get
that's
it
a good
back from
point.
10 to 1 people in there, and the local magazines talking about all the conservation groups rallying against the Forest Service. That's not conservation. Call it what it is. It's preservation. We got to reclaim our word. And we've got to reclaim the space. We've got to show up in those meetings and tip that balance back where it should be. Because you know what? Most people in the general public, if they have that nuanced discussion, say, oh, yeah, that sustainable management makes sense. We've let the far fringes drive that conversation for too long.
Yeah. And for sure, now, Mark and I have this conversation a lot too about folks have, such broader platforms today too with all the social media and everything like that. And we're kind of showing up to that game late too. And so whether, it's the preservation groups under conservation groups or whoever, we've got to start showing up in all those spaces and getting those messages across, from every level, from preservation group to, to some of our stakeholders that are truly our stakeholders, that are hunters and other folks that may not be spreading the same kind of information that's rooted in the science and coming from the same place as we are. So super important to do that.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point.
Too. If you talk about social media, it doesn't take long to say, if you love wildlife, why would you cut a tree? Boom, done. Well, yeah. So we don't have time to have this academic, nuanced
debate
conversation on social media. We're getting crushed.
Yeah.
So you need to play the same ball game, and we need to really think about how we design our social media messaging to be that succinct and that concise. Otherwise, we're just going to continue to get run over on our our high horse here of, well, yeah, but this is supported by science and blah, blah, blah. You already lost them because the 7-second bullet point.
Social media is no place to get scientific consensus.
No, we need a campaign of, if you love wildlife, why wouldn't you cut a tree?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, so there are also some of those groups are, in addition to just being ahead of the curve on the timeline, they're way more organized than us. For example, that particular prescription in Georgia, when it went out for public comment, that group has organizers all over the country. They send out an email blast that says, go comment on proposal titled this number. And they go into the registry, where you can comment where it's at, and they are organized. They tell them what to say. They send them like a one pager. Here's the name of the proposal. Here's what they're trying to do. Here's the keyword. Like, they tell them what to say. And they told me this. Like, they're like, oh yeah, we have organizers all over the place that we make sure that we flood the public comments. And I asked the Forest Service wildlife biologist, I said, how does this work? Like, they comment, and she was, well, we have to address, I think's the word they use, Ben, you may know, we have to address every comment. And so what happens is very few pro timber management folks or true conservation, to Ben's point, go and comment and show, hey, no, this is great, we need to do it. Now some do, but we're outnumbered, like you said, 10 to 1 in the comment section on the Federal Register during the comment period for a proposed timber cut. And the Forest Service spends all their time, that's what they told me, trying to address some of the outlandish things they're being accused of. Then, then they have to get, this group was adamant they would file lawsuits against the Forest Service every time they thought a tree was going to get cut. They had a lawyer. They would file a lawsuit, and then the Forest Service has to deal with that.
It's a different business.
We're being not only outplayed,
Yeah, well, it's a different business model. I think this is worthy of consideration. This isn't a place that we're going to go. Our business model is to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And right now we have a forest wildlife specialist on the ground in North Georgia. We have a forest wildlife specialist on the ground doing this work in the upstate of South Carolina. And so we're here to get things done. What the groups you're talking about, you're absolutely right. What they are spending their donations, their operating money on is marketing and communications and attorneys. And if given the chance to actually do something proactively, they don't have the structure to be able to do that. And we saw this in several cases when funding came available during the last administration through Bill and Ira, didn't have the capacity to actually deliver the work on the ground because they've invested in communications and the legal system. And that's fine. It's not our business model to go there, but I think it's probably worthy of consideration of, could some other groups get stood up that are truly in the conservation space that make that part of their business model. But it's a huge part of all the inner working that we have to do to go from concept, identifying a landscape that needs to be more resilient, more diverse, to getting that work done. So we could spend all day talking about the anti-management groups, and I don't want them to suck more oxygen out of the room than they normally do. But it's a big challenge, and it's something that we're always working with.
Well, I think we'll just cap that into the conversation with, you made a really good point. The actual definition of conservation and how it's been hijacked, and how we as the conservation minded folks have just, we haven't fought back on that enough. That's an excellent point. I had not considered that, but you're spot on. Callicutt, we at 50. You want to wrap up with dog stuff?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good thing to wrap up with, because I was thinking about that too. Is when we think about management and all the things, for Woodcock down here, it may be a little hard to get some of that done because our stakeholder group is not really heavy on the Woodcock side. There's not that many folks out there, but it has been growing recently, at least in Mississippi, and I think that's completely attributed, or mostly contributed, to the growing bird dog culture that we're seem to be in here in the South. Because before, no one kept bird dogs because the quail had diminished to a point where it wasn't worth keeping one. But now a lot more folks are getting into the bird dog scene, and I think that's a really cool part of bringing people to hunting some of these lesser pursued critters. I don't think that we'll ever get a real rising band of gallinule hunters or anything, because bird dogs, but woodcocks certainly are becoming more popular.
Well, Cody Senatol told me last week that there's a American Woodcock, either they have or they're trying to get American Woodcock Society chapter in Louisiana. So that's a good sign. I don't know if it's already happened or if it's still in the process, but that's a cool thing to see. I definitely never heard it. Look, my whole life growing up in Louisiana, I never heard of a woodcock. You couldn't have given me $10,000 to tell you what one was. And now I'm sitting here going, how many years did I miss of pursuing this incredibly fun, wildly infuriating bird? So all that to say, the dogs and getting the dogs engaged is why a lot of us spend so much time, in addition to our conservation nature, our ethos. But man, let's wrap this up talking about getting dogs on the ground. So Ben, you strike me as a setter guy. Is that correct?
I am. Before there's a quick segue here, and you mentioned as far as stakeholder groups and prioritizing this with our state wildlife agency partners. You're right. We're not going to have as many grouse or woodcock hunters as we do, say, deer hunters as a stakeholder group. It's also really important to note that grouse and woodcock, let's just take woodcock for a second, are listed in 28 of the state wildlife action plans across their range. So you do have some hunters, not as many as deer hunters or duck hunters or other things, but it is still a state wildlife agency responsibility species that is also a game species that's listed in most state wildlife action plans that are to be the blueprint for conservation priorities. So we've got plenty of justification to bring attention to the work that needs to be done for woodcock, not just based on number of hunters, which it is growing, but also as an action plan responsibility species. And ruffed grouse are listed in 19 state wildlife action plans across their range. So these are both species that are in trouble. So it's work worth doing. Thinking about woodcock and where we started this discussion of where should we go? And you look over there and your dog told you where to go. Woodcock hunting to me is the ultimate lesson to be learned in trust your dog. And I cannot tell you how many times. And at this point, I never fail to trust my dog, especially my 5-year-old setter. If she goes on point, I'm going there like there's a bird, because it's been a woodcock enough times where I thought, get back here. There's not a bird. There's no way. And I'm trying to call her off, and she's looking out of the corner of her eye going, "Oh, Dad, it's here. Phoebe, get back." There's no bird in its right mind would be stuck out in the middle of that. She's looking at me out of the whites of her eyes. I can see it. Nope, it's here. Trust your dog.
Yeah, trust your dog.
100%. Yep. Same thing here. The humbling, and my dog's not nearly as good as a lot of pointers, mainly as the lack of a good trainer. Yeah, he is. I've been humbled many times, but I'm like, there's no way. There's just no way. And that one that James told that story, I mean, 300 yards to the woods you could see. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And we just thought, and he's a little goofy, so we thought he just stopped to stare at us. Like, why are you guys stopping? Because I was cussing at my phone because the service was bad. And it kept moving me. I was trying to get to a pin a buddy of ours had sent us, and it kept bouncing. And I'm like cussing my phone, and the dog hasn't moved in what, James, 2-3 minutes?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're like, it's just Woodrow being Woodrow, but no, he's got a bird under his nose. So yeah, that's a good point. They trust your dog at Woodcock are a good one for that. My
give
goodness.
Woodcock their due as well. I often hear, Woodcock are a great starter target for young pointing dogs, and that's absolutely true. And I think it's also true that the pinnacle of a bird dog that does anything is a pointing dog that can handle ruffed grouse. A seasoned adult toward the end of the hunting season running ruffed grouse is as hard as anything for any bird dog to handle. So that is definitely, I'll put a stake in the ground that that's the pinnacle. But I have seen Woodcock do some crazy things, including run all over the place and run circles around.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fantastic dog work that I've had the privilege to see in Woodcock covers. Those little dudes, the Rodney Dangerfield, I guess, of the uplands, I love them, and I don't think they get nearly enough credit. And our RGS and AWS staff that are going to listen to this later, they're like, oh my gosh, here he goes again on his, we can't get him off of Woodcock. I love them. They're great.
Look, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, but same thing. It was like, I can remember our good friend and hunting partner, John Mark Curtis. He's our Quail Forever state coordinator. Got a great dog. And he was like, I think that woodcock moved. And we're like, what? He's like, yeah, I think the woodcock ran. And we're like, did woodcock do? Like, I had no idea. And then it became, because his dog, of the dogs on our trip, was the most experienced and solid dog. I'm like, all right. And John Mark think this woodcock's moving. This woodcock's moving. If it had been my dog, I'd be like, hey, he just missed the point. But that was pretty impressive to see and to observe. But yes, I agree. We started going there when our dogs were young to try to get as many contacts as we could. And of course, we hunt them down here too. And just last year would be my dog's third year, was his third year in the grouse woods. And he had just started figuring out that these birds were running on him. And it was fun to watch him. All of a sudden, he started going, oh, no, I'm being tricked. And he would completely just go off course and then come back and try to pin it. And then a bird would flush. And it was like, oh, my goodness, okay, you finally figured this out. It took me a while to figure it out because I didn't think he was that smart. As James will tell you, he's kind of like the dumb jock in a teen movie. He's really pretty. He's really athletic. He's gorgeous. He's not a big thinker. He's like a big dumb jock in a teen movie. He'll bust through it. Anyway, so yeah, I agree, man. The woodcock don't get enough respect. Yeah, they cause me a tremendous amount of joy and frustration come January down here.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to start seeing, and as my fellow biologist, maybe I'll throw a little shade here, but it drives me nuts. We're going to start seeing them pretty soon. All the newspaper reporters are going to call the agency biologists, and they're going to say, "Give us the grouse forecast." And I'm like, "Here we go."
Yeah.
This is the biggest coin flip that there is. And so I just want to, as one of the final words here, say to everybody, read it, have fun, enjoy reading that. And our agency biologists, and I'll get called for some of these, and, we'll give the forecast or whatever. Just get your dog out and go hunting.
Just go hunting.
Yeah.
Just get your dog. My forecast for this year, I'll make it right now. Here it is. And you can bet on this one. There are going to be grouse and woodcock out there in covers somewhere. And if you go there with your friends or by yourself, but with your dogs, you are going to have a good day. Go.
Damn straight.
Yeah.
Just go.
Right. Exactly.
Just go hunting. Yeah.
Just go hunting.
That's like the most epic ending line I think we've had in all these podcasts. Just go hunting.
Just go hunting.
Join the Ruffed Grouse Society and American Woodcock Society. We just got another award for our Covers magazine, which is worth the price of admission in and of itself, but you're also supporting the work that we're doing. You're helping support the research. Covers magazine will come to you 4 times a year. Join for $35. It's worth every bit of that. So we'd love to have everybody here listening as members, and it's what we need to stay a healthy organization and keep supporting this kind of work for these birds we love.
Absolutely. And I definitely enjoy the Covers magazine. I'll definitely endorse that as well. It's definitely worth the price tag just to get to read those articles. And so, but Ben, I appreciate you coming on with us. This has been a fun conversation. We don't get to talk about woodcock or grouse at all, hardly. So I appreciate you joining us, and we'd love to have you back sometime soon.
Yeah, man.
I would
right.
like to come
Thank you.
back and look
And
forward
everybody
to-
just go hunt.
everybody get out there and hunt. Mark and James, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on Gamebird University podcast. To keep up to date on when new episodes are dropped, or for more information on game birds and their management, you can follow us on Instagram at MSUEXT_Gamebird, or follow us on Facebook at MSU Extension Gamebird Program.